Hello everyone. In this video, let's focus some time in terms of understanding a bubble chart, and let's plot one bubble chart for our data. The prime intention for the bubble chart is more of a three-dimensional analysis where three different types of values have to be compared in a single two-dimensional plane. For example, for some select players. So this time instead of select going with one player, I would like to do some kind of multiplayer analysis, multiplayer comparison analysis. So I would like to select, let's say, some 5 players. So right now let me type them. After that we can even pull them from the drop downs. So I will select some 5 players. Okay, so let me have these 5 players. Probably we can change them. So for these 5 players, I'm more interested. The moment I select these 5, I would like to see some chart which gives some kind of comparison across these 5 players. Right, so I may say select any 5 players. We'll provide the drop down slightly later. Right, so here these two I would merge to create some better data set. Then probably each of these guys I'll put into a different cells here so that the data selection would happen. Now let's say any of these 5 players selected like this in 5 different, I may provide them as drop downs later, but let's say any 5 players selected like this, I want some kind of comparative analysis to be done for each of these players. So that's where I am trying to depend on this kind of bubble chart. What kind of comparison do I require? The moment any 5 players are selected, for each of these 5 in a single sheet, I would like to see what is their average, so that is one, what is their strike rate, and how many runs they have scored against each of the select countries. So let me set the data from that perspective. So whosoever are the players I'm selecting, I would take their player details. So let me say here the country I want to be selected, let's say, as one of the countries. All right. But at the same time, I need to have a list of countries for which I would like to do this kind of an analysis. So what I would typically try doing is I'll list down all the possible countries for which I would like to see this, or for time being, let's say I want to look at country specific. Okay, all these 5 guys, whosoever I have selected. All right, SC Ganguly. Instead of typing them, probably I would like to point. Okay, this is equal to the first player selected. Then I'll take the second player who is selected from here. Then I would go with the third. Then here I would go. So if I change the name anywhere, it would automatically be reflected. Fair enough. So these are the 5 people I would like to observe. What is that I would like to observe for these 5 people against Australia? What is the runs they have scored? What is their average? And what is their strike rate? So 3 different number columns. I am plotting them in one single sheet. I can take the help, and that too where one of these three columns will be an x-axis value, the other is a y-axis value, and the other one is a data. So the bubble chart typically plots your data in that kind of a dimension. Alright, so what I can think of is I'll plot averages on the x-axis, the strike rates on the y-axis, and I'll have the runs being represented as the bubble. Alright, so to set the data, what I will do is I'll use an appropriate formulas. First, I will get the runs using the SUMIF functions, SUMIFs. So I'm using, just like the way we have used in the earlier cases, SUMIFs. I would like to do the summation of the runs where the name of the player matches with this value. I'll put a dollar before I so that I can drag it appropriately. And at the same time, I want another criteria that the country or the opposition, is equal to Australia. Alright, I'll put the dollars by pressing F4. So these are the runs this particular person has scored against Australia, and if I drag them down, I'll get the runs scored by the other players against each of these countries. Now, just to arrive at the average, I would divide the runs by the total number of matches in which he was out against that particular country. So that's what I'll do. I'll use countifs function. So in the denominator, I'll make it as countifs. Though there are multiple criteria. One, the player name should match. So the name of the player is equal to this name. Alright. Then the opposition should be equal to Australia. So I'll select this column of opposition where I would equate it to Australia with a dollar, and also I need to have the number of matches in which he was out. So I would even select this one and I would say out, because not out matches are not counted as a part of the average. So okay, so probably this is looking slightly bigger. What I'll do is I'll do a simple rounding to a 2 decimals. So I'll round this entire thing to 2 decimals, which will give me that his strike rate is average was 44.59. Someone else has only 23, this person had only 25, and so on. Then similarly I can go with the strike rate. Strike rate wise I can do the same thing as the runs, but instead of the runs I need the balls. So what I'll do is I'll take this equal to the runs divided by the summation of the same stuff, but instead of adding up the runs, which is the C column, I'll add up the ball space. Yeah, and this comes into a I can multiply this by 100 to generate a number uh, uh, which is per every 100 balls. Make this equivalent to round it up to the 2 digits after the decimal point. This gives me the strike rates of each of these 5 people. Alright. Now what I can do is I'll plot a simple bubble chart. I'll select this data. I can do a bubble chart, or what I can do is I can simply insert a bubble chart. This is what is a bubble chart. I'll simply insert the bubble chart. Now I need to start setting the data, so I'll do a select data. The first thing I need to do there is set what is the x value, what is the y value, and then talk about the run. So when I'm doing a data series add, I need to talk about the series name. Probably let me call it as multiplayer analysis. Then yeah, what is the series X? I'll take average on the X axis. So this is what I'm calling as series X. I'll take the strike rates on the Y axis and I'll take the runs scored on the Z axis. Alright, so this is what is a bubble. Okay, so it is saying multiplayer analysis and a bubble is plotted. But yeah, we are not able to interpret too much on the bubble. The x-axis is showing the different averages, y-axis is showing the strike rates. But because the bubbles by default are of a very high size, we are not able to interpret too much on that. So what I will do is I select the bubbles, go to this format data series, and I say size of the bubble, let's say bring it down to let's say 40. Now with that what happens is there would be a slightly smaller bubble across, and what we also see here is probably I don't need this legend anymore, so slightly spacious. And the bubbles also, what I can very well do is instead of showing all of them of the same color, I can again go back to this format data series fill and I say vary colors by point. So each of the bubbles is of a different plot. Now how do I interpret this? Okay, the size of this bubble is much larger, which means this player actually has scored many runs against this particular country. Then average wise, yeah, the one which is on the highest on the x-axis, again the same blue player has the highest average against this country, which is Australia. And who is having the highest strike rate? Probably this light blue person is having the highest strike rate, whereas these two guys are having the lowest possible strike rates. And even average wise, this particular person with the light blue color is having this kind of a lesser average around the 20s. But how do I identify which player corresponds to whom? So what do I do for that is I'll simply do a data label. We'll play around with it. Initially I'll add a data label, but this data label may not give any kind of a good information for us. So what I would typically do is instead of having this number here, as we have discussed in our other charts, I go to this 84.74 corresponds to this SR Tendulkar. So what I'll do is I go here equal to and point to this cell. So this will start writing it as SR Tendulkar. The same way I can operate with the other players. Press F2. Then I say equal to 71.92 corresponds to MS Dhoni. So let me select this cell. So it writes MS Dhoni. Then similarly go select here, press F2, 88.01 corresponds to this player. Yeah, just let me do it again. F2, come here, equal to this. So this is the name of the player there. Then same way I can work it out. Even this 0.84, 67.84 corresponds to this person. So I come there, F2 equal to, I point to this. So this name gets changed to this. And probably yes, 67.74 also I can address the same way. I come here equal to and point to this person. Now, if required, I can even reduce the font and all of these people to make it more readable and all. All right, let me say change all these things a little bit so that not too much of cluttering occurs. Probably we can move the position of each of them, and all of them selected. I can make it Cambria and then make them equivalent to 7 in their size. I can make them equal to 7 in size corresponding to each of them. Yeah, let me have this kind of a structure. Now just to test this out, what I can very well do is change the name of the country here, let's say to England, and what I see is that the graph keeps changing in this process. The graph keeps changing in this. We get a slightly larger, smaller kind of bubbles. Let's say I again change it to Pakistan. I get a slightly different size in the bubbles. The size of the bubble is different. The kind of locations for these players is different, and that is what is constituting to our bubble chart. So what I can very well do is to make it more interesting, I'll remove these grid lines. So this is what is the graph, and I don't need to even have this heading. So I'll make the graph position look slightly much better to make sure that my graph is coming out more and more comfortable. So I can have a dynamic axis itself, because we don't know, the numbers could be much higher against some country, much lower against some country. So it's better to retain the axis as it is. Now what I do is I'll take this chart here. I'll create a space here, call it as player average strike rate runs bubble. Okay, so let me make it bold and put some kind of a background color to it. And then let me take this as the chart area. Do the necessary background to that chart area and get this chart, Control X, and paste this here. Okay, I need to make it as small as possible, and at the same time probably, or I can make it slightly bigger, because I need a bit of details into it. So I'll add one more row into this so that the data becomes slightly comfortable, or probably a couple of more columns also, more rows also I'll add to make the data slightly look bigger. Alright, so I'll keep it like this. Yeah, now this is looking fair enough. And even I don't want any kind of plot area, so I'll make the plot area as no fill, and even the chart background I'll make it chart area also, I'll make it as no fill. So this is how my chart looks like. Now here, the country analysis right now, I'm typing in. Okay, this is the first version of the bubble. Probably the country, if I type, let's say what I'll do is I want the country, let's say, to be Pakistan. What I can very well do is here I will make it equal to this location. Alright, so now what happens is here itself, if I change it, let's say to Australia, I'll get a different bubble. And if I change it to South Africa, I'll get a different bubble. So player wise bubbles can very well be created, and if required I can even make it as Sri Lanka, where I'll get different kinds of bubble, or Zimbabwe, I get a different bubble. So across all these countries, I'm getting different kinds of bubbles for each of the players. So this is the basic preliminary version of the bubble chart, where my focus is to look at the three different dimensions of data, and based on them plotting them. So three different scale based data: average on one axis, strike rate on one axis, and runs on one axis. That can give me a very good coverage to the analysis of this data. Yeah, this is probably this background is looking very dark. What I can do is I can make it slightly lighter. Let's say this background, let me put, yeah, this is looking much better. Then, so this is what is the preliminary version of the bubble chart. We'll do some more enhancements to this bubble chart, but as a starting point, so I want the person to enter these five values. I want the person to enter these five and even choose the name of the country. The moment, let's say, I don't want to track our Dravid here, I want to track, let's say, SK Raina, I'll get a different bubble altogether. Or instead of this SK Raina, I want to type V Kohli, I'll get a different bubble. So we typically get different kinds of bubbles on each of these axes. Instead of Zimbabwe, I would like to type Australia. I'll get a different kind of bubble for each of the persons. So corresponding to that person, we can definitely create a bubble, and that's how this data is coming up. And probably if I think that on this name, slightly above the name, or even this name is much away from the bubble, so I want to put it much closer to the bubbles. This can very well be done. Very close to the bubble, you would like to have the name. Even this name I would like to have very close to the bubble. You can very well plan out. Sometimes because of the data which we have, we can very well see that the bubbles are right. We can very well plan out in terms of making the look and feel of the bubble much better. Right, if we think the size is even more bigger, we can reduce it even more smaller. We'll actually look at all those things slightly later, but this is the way to typically understand a bubble chart. We'll try to have a couple of more sessions in trying to make this part more and more dynamic. So I'll come back to you on those kind of items one by one. But I hope this overview of the bubble chart, we will look at a couple of more different varieties of bubble chart. But let me understand that the bubble chart which we are plotting here has given you some level of comfort in terms of understanding the typical working of a simple bubble chart. Thanks a lot for listening to this video. Thank you very much.